Chapter 25 of Anna Karenina, Book 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Laurianne Walden. Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Constance Garnett. Book 2, Chapter 25. There were 17 officers in all riding in this race. The race course was a large 3-mile ring of the form of an ellipse in front of the pavilion. On this course 9 obstacles had been arranged: the stream, a big and solid barrier 5 feet high just before the pavilion, a dry ditch, a ditch full of water, a precipitous slope, an Irish barricade, one of the most difficult obstacles, consisting of a mound fenced with brushwood, beyond which was a ditch out of sight for the horses, so that the horse had to clear both obstacles or might be killed. Then 2 more ditches filled with water, and one dry one, and the end of the race was just facing the pavilion. But the race began not in the ring, but 200 yards away from it, and in that part of the course was the first obstacle, a dammed-up stream 7 feet in breadth, which the racers could leap or wade through as they preferred. 3 times they were ranged ready to start, but each time some horse thrust itself out of line, and they had to begin again. The umpire who was starting them, Colonel Sestrin, was beginning to lose his temper, when at last, for the 4th time, he shouted, "Away!" and the racers started. Every eye, every opera glass, was turned on the brightly colored group of riders at the moment they were in line to start. "They're off! They're starting!" was heard on all sides after the hush of expectation. And little groups and solitary figures among the public began running from place to place to get a better view. In the very first minute the close group of horsemen drew out, and it could be seen that they were approaching the stream in 2s and 3s, and one behind another. To the spectators it seemed as though they had all started simultaneously, but to the racers there were seconds of difference that had great value to them. Frou Frou, excited and over-nervous, had lost the first moment, and several horses had started before her, but before reaching the stream, Vronsky, who was holding in the mare with all his force as she tugged at the bridle, easily overtook 3, and there were left in front of him Mahotin's chestnut Gladiator, whose hindquarters were moving lightly and rhythmically up and down exactly in front of Vronsky, and in front of all, the dainty mare Diana bearing Kuzovlev, more dead than alive. For the first instant Vronsky was not master either of himself or his mare. Up to the first obstacle, the stream, he could not guide the motions of his mare. Gladiator and Diana came up to it together, and almost at the same instant. Simultaneously they rose above the stream and flew across to the other side. Frou Frou darted after them as if flying, but at the very moment when Vronsky felt himself in the air, he suddenly saw, almost under his mare's hoofs, Kuzovlev, who was floundering with Diana on the further side of the stream. Kuzovlev had let go the reins as he took the leap, and the mare had sent him flying over her head. Those details Vronsky learned later. At the moment all he saw was that just under him, where Frou Frou must alight, Diana's legs or head might be in the way. But Frou Frou drew up her legs and back in the very act of leaping, like a falling cat, and clearing the other mare, alighted beyond her. "Oh, the darling!" thought Vronsky. After crossing the stream, Vronsky had complete control of his mare, and began holding her in, intending to cross the great barrier behind Mahotin, and to try to overtake him in the clear ground of about 500 yards that followed it. The great barrier stood just in front of the imperial pavilion. The Tsar and the whole court and crowds of people were all gazing at them, at him and Mahotin a length ahead of him, as they drew near the "devil," as the solid barrier was called. Vronsky was aware of those eyes fastened upon him from all sides, but he saw nothing except the ears and neck of his own mare, the ground racing to meet him, and the back and white legs of Gladiator beating time swiftly before him, and keeping always the same distance ahead. Gladiator rose with no sound of knocking against anything. With a wave of his short tail he disappeared from Vronsky's sight. "Bravo!" cried a voice. At the same instant, under Vronsky's eyes, right before him flashed the palings of the barrier. Without the slightest change in her action his mare flew over it, the palings vanished, and he heard only a crash behind him. The mare, excited by Gladiator's keeping ahead, had risen too soon before the barrier and grazed it with her hind hoofs. But her pace never changed, and Vronsky, feeling a spatter of mud in his face, realized that he was once more the same distance from Gladiator. Once more he perceived in front of him the same back and short tail, and again the same swiftly moving, white legs that got no further away. At the very moment when Vronsky thought that now was the time to overtake Mahotin, Frou Frou herself, understanding his thoughts, without any incitement on his part, gained ground considerably, and began getting alongside of Mahotin on the most favorable side, close to the inner cord. Mahotin would not let her pass that side. Vronsky had hardly formed the thought that he could perhaps pass on the outer side, when Frou Frou shifted her pace and began overtaking him on the other side. Frou Frou's shoulder, beginning by now to be dark with sweat, was even with Gladiator's back. For a few lengths they moved evenly. But before the obstacle they were approaching, Vronsky began working at the reins, anxious to avoid having to take the outer circle, and swiftly passed Mahotin just upon the declivity. He caught a glimpse of his mud-stained face as he flashed by. He even fancied that he smiled. Vronsky passed Mahotin, but he was immediately aware of him close upon him, and he never ceased hearing the even thudding hoofs and the rapid and still quite fresh breathing of Gladiator. The next two obstacles, the watercourse and the barrier, were easily crossed, but Vronsky began to hear the snorting and thud of Gladiator closer upon him. He urged on his mare, and to his delight felt that she easily quickened her pace, and the thud of Gladiator's hoofs was again heard at the same distance away. Vronsky was at the head of the race, just as he wanted to be, and as Cord had advised, and now he felt sure of being the winner. His excitement, his delight, and his tenderness for Frou Frou grew keener and keener. He longed to look round again, but he did not dare do this, and tried to be cool and not to urge on his mare so to keep the same reserve of force in her as he felt that Gladiator still kept. There remained only one obstacle, the most difficult. If he could cross it ahead of the others, he would come in first. He was flying towards the Irish barricade. Frou Frou and he both together saw the barricade in the distance, and both the man and the mare had a moment's hesitation. He saw the uncertainty in the mare's ears and lifted the whip, but at the same time felt that his fears were groundless. The mare knew what was wanted. She quickened her pace and rose smoothly, just as he had fancied she would, and as she left the ground gave herself up to the force of her rush, which carried her far beyond the ditch, and with the same rhythm, without effort, with the same leg forward, Frou Frou fell back into her pace again. "Bravo, Vronsky!" he heard shouts from a knot of men. He knew they were his friends in the regiment, who were standing at the obstacle. He could not fail to recognize Yashvin's voice, though he did not see him. "Oh, my sweet," he said inwardly to Frou Frou, as he listened for what was happening behind. "He's cleared it," he thought, catching the thud of Gladiator's hoofs behind him. There remained only the last ditch, filled with water and 5 feet wide. Vronsky did not even look at it, but anxious to get in a long way first, began sawing away at the reins, lifting the mare's head and letting it go, in time with her paces. He felt that the mare was at her very last reserve of strength. Not her neck and shoulders merely were wet, but the sweat was standing in drops on her mane, her head, her sharp ears, and her breath came in short, sharp gasps. But he knew that she had strength left more than enough for the remaining 500 yards. It was only from feeling himself nearer the ground and from the peculiar smoothness of his motion that Vronsky knew how greatly the mare had quickened her pace. She flew over the ditch as though not noticing it. She flew over it like a bird, but at the same instant Vronsky, to his horror, felt that he had failed to keep up with the mare's pace, that he had, he did not know how, made a fearful, unpardonable mistake in recovering his seat in the saddle. All at once his position had shifted, and he knew that something awful had happened. He could not yet make out what had happened, when the white legs of a chestnut horse flashed by close to him, and Mahotin passed at a swift gallop. Vronsky was touching the ground with one foot, and his mare was sinking on that foot. He just had time to free his leg when she fell on one side, gasping painfully, and making vain efforts to rise with her delicate, soaking neck, she fluttered on the ground at his feet like a shot bird. The clumsy movement made by Vronsky had broken her back. But that he only knew much later. At that moment he knew only that Mahotin had flown swiftly by, while he stood staggering alone on the muddy, motionless ground, and Frou-Frou lay gasping before him, bending her head back and gazing at him with her exquisite eyes. Still unable to realize what had happened, Vronsky tugged at his mare's reins. Again she struggled all over like a fish, and her shoulders setting the saddle heaving, she rose on her front legs, but unable to lift her back, she quivered all over and again fell on her side. With a face hideous with passion, his lower jaw trembling and his cheeks white, Vronsky kicked her with his heel in the stomach and again fell to tugging at the rein. She did not stir, but thrusting her nose into the ground, she simply gazed at her master with her speaking eyes. "Ah!" groaned Vronsky, clutching at his head. "Ah, what have I done?" he cried. "The race lost, and my fault. Shameful, unpardonable. And the poor darling ruined mare. Ah, what have I done?" A crowd of men, a doctor and his assistant, the officers of his regiment, ran up to him. To his misery he felt that he was whole and unhurt. The mare had broken her back, and it was decided to shoot her. Vronsky could not answer questions, could not speak to anyone. He turned and without picking up his cap that had fallen off, walked away from the race course, not knowing where he was going. He felt utterly wretched. For the first time in his life he knew the bitterest sort of misfortune, misfortune beyond remedy, and caused by his own fault. Yashvin overtook him with his cap and led him home, and half an hour later Vronsky had regained his self-possession. But the memory of that race remained for long in his heart, the cruelest and bitterest memory of his life. End of chapter 25.